Republican Congressman and candidate for Texas Attorney General Chip Roy, thank you so much and welcome to Eye on Politics.
Great to be with you.
Nice to be with you. So why are you giving up your seat in Congress to run for Texas Attorney General, and what is the essence of your campaign?
Well, first of all, it's not my seat to give up. It's the people's seat. I've proudly represented 750,000 Texas in Texas 21 through tough times like the Kerrville floods this summer, through shutdowns, through the COVID era issues, and I've been proud of what we've been able to accomplish. But at the end of the day, I'm 1/435th of 1/2 of 1/3 of the federal government. And I feel like I've been able to outkick my coverage, if you will. I've been able to do a lot of good in changing the institution and trying to make it more responsive to the people. We went through a whole battle during the speaker's fight, which was the entire nation was looking at, because we wanted to change the place and make it work, I think, in a way that better reflects the people. And I'm proud of that. And I always say when I'm campaigning, and even though I'm campaigning statewide, I'll be careful when I say this, but I do think I represent the heart of Texas, the best part of the best state in the best country in the history of the world. But God's got his own agenda and his own plan. And when Ken Paxton decided to run for Senate, that left a spot to be filled at the office of the Attorney General. And I feel like the good Lord has given me the skill set at this unique time in Texas history and American history to serve as Attorney General. Former federal prosecutor in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I was a prosecutor in Plano and Sherman, lived in McKinney in the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I was the former First Assistant Attorney General. I know how the office works. I've had to put my signature on all the court filings and lead the office alongside the Attorney General. And we need a strong Attorney General with a proven track record, a conservative, someone who knows the job on day one, someone who's respected around the country, whether they agree with me or not, because they know that I'll stand up and fight. And Texas needs a leader right now in the office of the Attorney General going forward to carry that great legacy forward, but defend Texas against the onslaught that's coming against it at the border, criminals being put on our streets, on our cities, the advance of Sharia law, the extent to which we have the over-corporatification of our state, and a lot of issues the AG's office is front and center on.
So that's the essence of your campaign.
Yeah, look, I mean, right now we're dealing with a president and a leadership in Washington that has stopped the flow at the border in a way that's beneficial to Texas. We actually have reasonable security. But we're dealing with all the after effects of that, and going forward, we may have a president and deal with something like we dealt with Biden and Mayorkas again. And we've got to have strong leadership there to make sure our border is secure going forward no matter what. And number two, we've got to have someone who's going to partner with this administration to remove the people who need to be removed from our state. We've got to have someone who's going to stand up and fight to ensure that Soros-funded DAs and the radical Marxist left that's putting DAs in office that are putting criminals on our streets and endangering our people in Austin and Dallas and Houston and San Antonio, increasingly even in Tarrant, which is kind of the last bastion of, I think, of a red city in the state. We've got to stand up and fight to make sure our streets are safe. And importantly, this issue of Sharia law and the Islamification of Texas. It is by far the most pressing issue that we need to address and face. And you got to have somebody who understands the Constitution, that has got a track record of defending the First Amendment, but recognizing the First Amendment isn't an excuse for a politically motivated political effort to try to Islamify this state. And we've got to stand up and defend it. So those are priorities. And the last one that people don't always understand is when I say the corporatification of Texas. I don't think Texas should be governed by boardrooms in New York or Chicago or even Dallas or Houston. The people of Texas own this state. We own our ranches. We own our cattle. We should be owning our meat packing and processing. We should be able to take care of our cities and our local cities and towns across the state of Texas to be able to make sure we live the way we want to, not through corporate decision making. And I think you need an AG's office to stand up against that.
You said a lot, so I want to go through some of what you said. But first I want to ask you just another question for the Republican primary voter who's going to be watching this. Why should they select you over the other Republican candidates in the race?
Well, I know what I'm looking for in an attorney general, right? I want somebody with a proven track record of being conservative. It's hard to have a more solid conservative voting record than I have, with scores from all of the major groups that are either number one or top couple in the entire United States Congress and among, frankly, all elected leaders. And that's ranging across the issues, whether you're talking cultural issues like life or guns, whether you're talking about limited government freedom, or frankly, adherence to the Trump agenda and the GOP platform. I'm ranked number one in the state of Texas, number two in the entire House, number 5 out of everybody when you add up the Senate and the House in terms of following the Republican platform and my votes standing up in defense of it. Number two, you need somebody who's actually held elected office. We've got at least one candidate who's never been elected so much as dog catcher. And I think you need someone who has been there, been in the cauldron, put his or her name out there in front of the people, and has had to stand up to the scrutiny of having an election certificate representing Texans. I have multiple times over. And I think you need somebody who's been in a courtroom. We've got at least one or two candidates who really haven't been in a courtroom. I've been a prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I've been the first Assistant Attorney General, sitting alongside our lawyers and our counsels, defending the state of Texas and having to put my name out there in defense of the state. It's not a time for on-the-job training. It's time for someone who can do it, who's got a track record of doing it. You don't have to wonder where they're coming from, and has the experience to be the Attorney General.
How do you see this primary shaking out?
Well, look, I think it's always up to the people, and you know, I don't fear primaries. You know, I had 18 people in my primary for Congress in 2018. People don't remember that. And I won the primary, but had to go to a runoff, won the runoff, and then won a tight race in the 2018 year. Because remember, I used to represent a lot more of Austin. So that was an R plus 3 or 4 district, which, by the way, brings me to another point about who you want running. You want somebody who's run in tight general election races, who can win a tough general election race. Because no matter what happens, we can assume Republicans can just walk in November, but you got to go earn it. And I had to fight Wendy Davis in a $30 million race right here in Austin, Texas, and we won it. And we won by 7 points in an R plus 4 district when everybody said we couldn't. When we had ads being run against us, it was the 3rd most expensive race in the country in the general election. So look, I think the primary is going to be directed towards who do you want on the ticket in November to represent the state of Texas, guarantee that we can win because they have a proven track record of winning, and then we'll represent you as the chief legal officer of the state in the Office of Attorney General.
Do you think you can avoid a runoff?
I believe we can. And number one is because I'm reasonably well known in the state because I've been out there fighting for the people that I represent, but also for the entire state of Texas. And people know that. And I've got deep connections across the state. My dad grew up in West Texas. My mom was a military brat, was all over the place, including in San Antonio. My family lived in Northeast Texas. I was a prosecutor in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. My wife's family is from the Panhandle. We have family in Houston, all over the place, and obviously I represent Central Texas. And at the end of the day, the reception has been fantastic. Our polling is very strong. We are polling close to 50 in a number of polls that we've seen. And we've been consistently the number one polling candidate. But more important than that is just when I go across the state, the people and how they respond, they want leadership who can operate on day one. They know that's the case with me. And so we feel like we can win this on March 3rd.
I was just going to ask you, is this yours to lose?
Well, look, I think it's the people's race. It's not mine, right? God's in charge. I don't fear politics. I don't fear campaigns. I fear God, and I trust God to deliver for the people of Texas the right person for the job at the right time. And I trust the people. And I'm going to get out there and do everything I know how to do to get my message to the people of Texas, and then let the cards fall where they may. But I'm not worried about it. It's up to the people to decide.
How concerned are you that President Trump could enter this race in the sense of, you know, endorsing another candidate?
Look, I welcome President Trump's leadership and involvement in the race. He's shown great instincts for the country. I mean, just even over the last 2 months, going out and being, I think, the first president I've heard go after an industry as big as the insurance industry and going out and saying, why are we subsidizing insurance companies to the tune of $30 or $40 billion a year instead of helping the people that actually need help with their health care? The president's been willing to run into the fight, and that's what I've been doing. And he sees that I've been running into the fight to defend him, his administration, my friends that are in the administration, our policies, and we've been delivering the big, beautiful bill. July 3rd, we finished that, and then unfortunately the floods happened in Kerrville, and I had to be down in Kerrville. The president came down the next week, and he said, Chip and I spent a lot of time together last week, and he's not easy, right? But he basically said I was good, right? He said that I was good at what I do, and because he knows it, and we work together, and we've been working hard, and some of my best friends in the world are in his administration. I've got great support within the administration, and the president and I get along great. So I welcome his involvement and his leadership.
And speaking of the president, he's in office until 2028,
yeah.
And then there could be a change.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there could be a Democrat in the White House in 2029. And so I'm wondering, does the job as Attorney General change depending on who's in the White House?
Well, by definition, it will change in the sense that the Attorney General is responsible for defending the laws of Texas, but also defending Texas against the long arm of the federal government if it's interfering with Texas under our Constitution. We've got a great track record in history under Ken Paxton, under Greg Abbott, and going all the way back, we've had strong leadership pushing back on a intrusive federal government. That is more true from my perspective if you have a president like Joe Biden. We obviously have wildly different views. The current president is much more in line with our way of thinking in Texas. So there are fewer reasons you have to challenge the federal government, but you still do, by the way. There's still lawsuits, there are still things that go on where you've got to deal with legacy laws, legacy issues, defend the state of Texas, and it's important to do that. So that stays consistent. It's just a much greater effort when you've got a president that's at odds with your state. So under Joe Biden, you had to be very active if you're Ken Paxton in trying to defend the open borders, try to defend the policies that they were putting forward on, for example, issues involving life or issues involving so-called gender-affirming care or our schools. You have to have a much more proactive way of being the Attorney General to defend Texas against that overreach. So look, I believe we're in a good spot to have a really strong election in 28. We've got a great bench. We've got the Vice President. We've got Ted Cruz, my former boss and former presidential candidate. You've got Ron DeSantis down in Florida. You've got Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, and many others. We've got a deep bench of people who are respected across the country, and I believe we're going to deliver a really good candidate. But you need a good Attorney General either way, because you need someone who's going to defend the state of Texas in court, defend our own laws, and frankly, we've got a lot of things to peel back in the past, like Plyler v. Doe, a Supreme Court decision in the 80s that said that Texas has to fund the education of illegal alien children. I don't believe that's consistent with the Constitution or the law. I don't believe that requirement should be placed and that burden placed on the people of Texas. And so we should challenge that. And there are other areas that we need to lead going forward.
And so on that note, you agreed with the Justice Department lawsuit and that Texas ultimately settled, where people who maybe DACA recipients, et cetera, don't get in-state tuition for college. You agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the people of Texas, we have to be good stewards of our dollars, our taxes, our universities, and so we should not be funding the education of people who came here illegally, who didn't follow the laws. And that's the thing that's lost in all of this is you forget the implications of people coming here illegally. Like there are a wide array of people, from people who are evil and parts of gangs and want to do us harm, and that's a real population, to people who are good people who just want a better way of life. But remember that the open border policy is bad for them and bad for us. It creates an environment where we can be endangered. It creates an environment where then the person who comes here illegally, they're not operating under our laws, they use a false identification number, they steal somebody's social security number, and sometimes it's just because somebody gave it to them, said, you use this. All of that has a domino effect that undermines the rule of law. And people come to our country because we're supposed to be the beacon for the rule of law. We've undermined Western civilization. We undermine the Western Hemisphere. We empower the cartels and those that are running, the Northern Triangle, Mexico, South America, through illegal activities and through cartels, and endanger people rather than standing for the rule of law. So we have to do that. We have to say, no, you can't get the benefit of generations of taxpayer growth and development in the state of Texas to get in-state tuition or to get free education or free health care or free welfare. And by the way, when people think about when people came to this country in the first big immigration wave in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, and we benefited from that in Texas to some degree, both legal and illegal, fully acknowledged. But we had a massive wave of people who came here who wanted to assimilate and make their own way. There was not a welfare state in 1900 or 1920. There was not an education system that is teaching kids that it's okay to wave a Palestinian flag or your home country flag rather than embracing and adopting the American way of life. That's a very different world in 2025 than it was in 1925. We shut down immigration for about 40 years because we had such a massive influx of people. And these were all people who wanted to adopt our ways of life, wanted to assimilate, didn't have a welfare state, wanted to live the American dream, and basically wanted to adopt the American way of life. Now we have people who come here who want us to adopt Sharia, are telling us that we're evil. We have education that's teaching our kids that America's awful. We're not having assimilation. We're teaching multiple language. That is a wrong place to be when we have 51.5 million people here who are foreign born. That's why I introduced the Pause Act, to pause immigration, reset the table, get it right. That's why I introduced legislation to combat people who are adherent to Sharia law. And I will carry that same fight into the Office of Attorney General.
And I was going to ask you about both of the Pause Act, and you have been a very big outspoken critic on Sharia.
Sure.
And so I'm wondering, as Attorney General,
Yep.
and the governor has already obviously
Yep.
gone after CARE,
Yep.
the Muslim Brotherhood, et cetera, Sharia law, et cetera.
Sure.
So what will you be doing if you are elected about this in Texas? And you know, there's also religious freedom too, right? So how do you distinguish the two?
Well, first you have to acknowledge and be willing to speak out, as I have been. And by the way, earlier and louder than a lot of my colleagues or people generally in public office. Although I was gratified to see, for example, Tulsi Gabbard and others speak out about it just this weekend publicly, and how important it is and what a threat it is. The last text thread that I had with Charlie Kirk, before he tragically passed away and was murdered in September, was about this topic and about the extent to which Islamification of Texas, Islamification of America, the advancement of Sharia law is inconsistent with Western civilization, inconsistent with our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, and that we have to recognize that if you're actually going to win. And when you've got people who are coming in here and want to change America, that is a political movement. So back to your question about religious freedom, that is not saying that we can't allow you to believe what you want to believe. Right? You can, your relationship with our Creator, or if you're an atheist and you have that worldview, like, government can't tell you what to believe. And they can't prevent your ability to have religious expression. But what government can do is structure itself such that you're recognizing that we are who we are as a people based on the values that we created to create this country, and that if someone's coming in to change that through a politically motivated effort, which is what is very clear. If you read the writings of the Muslim Brotherhood, if you read the writings of the vast majority of the adherents to Sharia law and Islam generally, that there is a culture to change and to come here and change America from within. There's a reason Dallas is the epicenter. If you go look at the intelligence on all this, the Muslim Brotherhood will tell you that Dallas is front row, front and center. It's ground zero. The Holy Land Foundation case 25 years ago, that was Dallas-Fort Worth. You had conspiracy there with respect to engagement with terrorists. Then you've got some of the unindicted co-conspirators that are now affiliated with CARE, and we know this to be true. That's why I put forward legislation to take away their tax status. That's why the president's been right to calling them out. That's why Governor Abbott's right to call them out. The Office of the Attorney General has got to use every tool at its disposal to protect our Western civilization values, stop places like Epic City, which now they want to call
Plano,
Meadow,
the Meadow,
whatever, which, by the way, tells you a lot, from advancing to create essentially a 400-acre compound. And they say, well, don't worry, we're not going to exclude people. Yes, you will. Because I don't know anybody who wants to go live in a 400-acre compound that's effectively going to be Sharia compliant and advance the Islamification of that area in Texas. And so you're going to do that, and we've got to step in the breach. And look, the AG has done that, the governor's done that, but we've got to go even further. You can believe what you want to believe, but you can't come in here to try to change Texas and make it an Islamic state, which is what their stated objective has been.
Well, what more can you do?
Well, right now, what you've seen, there's things you can do under the Deceptive Trade Practices Act. There's things that you can do under the current law that you've seen the AG advancing. You can also call them out publicly. You can also go in and prosecute where you think, I can't prosecute, but you can advance the prosecution of people who are carrying out criminal activity under Sharia law, right, that are directly in conflict with our way of life and our laws in Texas, right? You've got Sharia courts that were operating in the DFW Metroplex. Right now in the UK, there are 85 jurisdictions where there are Sharia courts that are operating. That's not consistent with Western civilization, the Constitution, or the laws in Texas. You can't have gender mutilation. You can't have beating our wives because we're hiding behind Sharia law. Go prosecute those cases, and as the AG, go work with local district attorneys to do that. So there are plenty of things we can do on that front to defend our laws in Texas, but also stand up and recognize that when you've got taxpayer funds that are, for example, that are being used to effectively tamp out freedom of expression and freedom of religion, which is what happens when you create these cities that are effectively Sharia compliant cities.
And I'm just wondering, as far as this whole thing, who is pushing it, and what do you say to everyday Texans who may be of the Muslim faith?
Well, again, I'll say you can believe what you want to believe. I don't care whether you're Muslim, Hindu, atheist, agnostic, Christian, evangelical, Catholic, Jewish. Believe what you want to believe. But we built our society around a shared set of values that were historically, inarguably, Judeo-Christian values, right? That was how our country was founded. That's how all 50 states were developed. It's how we created. And we should remember that, recognize that. And when people want to come here and assimilate into that culture, you can believe what you want to believe. You can be Lutheran, you can be Catholic, you can be Baptist, you can be Jewish, you can be Muslim. But what you can't do is come here and try to change it and to create this and turn it into an Islamic society, because that is at odds with our founding and our way of life. And look, I think it's really important that people understand that this is a purposeful. You said, who's funding it? Why is it happening? There is a very provable, vast array of Marxist and Islamic networks funneling money into the United States in an organized way, with political operatives right in the center of all of it, whether it's Arabella, which is littered with Clinton and Obama and Biden cronies. You've got the Soros network, you've got Gates funding, you've got NGOs, there's hundreds of NGOs that are taking money. We're seeing all this stuff that's happening right now with the Medicaid fraud, with the Somalis in Minneapolis, and misuse of taxpayer money, which, by the way, is a whole nother path I could go down about the Office of Attorney General. Has enormous power with respect to corporations and NGOs and nonprofits. You can go look at the charters and go look at these nonprofits. Like, what are you doing? Why do you exist? Why are you chartered here? Why are you operating here? What are you doing? Where does your money come from? Are you tied to terrorist networks? Are you trying to undermine our way of law and our system of justice? And go after those and track those dollars, work with the federal government, work with Scott Bessent in the Treasury Department, as I'm doing currently as a member of Congress, to figure out the best way to track those dollars and figure out what's happening. Why does CARE get tax status? Why do they get tax benefit? Where does their money come from? We know there's tons of foreign dollars flowing into our country, tons of foreign interests that are buying up our land, tons of dollars that are being in a coordinated network that are driving a lot of the agenda we're talking about.
So as Texas Attorney General, you would be launching those investigations?
100%.
So let's talk, you brought up Charlie Kirk before.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of deadly shootings. His assassination, the assassination of a Minnesota state official and her husband, 2 attempted assassinations on President Trump. We've seen horrible school shootings, Uvalde, deadly shootings at churches. How do you prevent those?
Well, first of all, and I think this is really important, remember what's driving the animus and the hatred. And people like to try to point to, and I've listened to so many hearings in Congress where I've had, a whole bunch of people on the other side of the aisle trying to point fingers and saying, you guys, there's all these hate groups. And I say, hold on a second. Let's look at what's happening and which groups are advancing hate. Let's go look at Antifa. Let's go look at what's happening with the Southern Poverty Law Center. I held a hearing on them last week, and what they're doing to put literally the Family Research Council on their so-called hate map, which gave a literal roadmap to someone who went in there and shot up the Family Research Council a decade ago. And the people that I had testifying, including somebody from TPUSA, was talking about the extent to which that was driving a lot of this hatred and people of the animus to come target so-called conservative hate groups. Like Charlie Kirk would go to college campuses and say, prove me wrong. Like, come up here, let's debate. Let's have an open debate. How's that hate? You can have an open dialogue and a debate about faith, about issues of importance, about transgender surgeries, about things that we think are really critical to the fabric of our society. And then people say, well, that's hate. Like Chip, like the stuff I was just saying on Islam and the Islamification of Texas. Some people have already, including the Southern Poverty Law Center, has said Chip Roy's a hater. He's pushing hate speech, because I'm daring to question the extent to which Islam is targeting my state and my country. So yeah, we need to focus in on the groups that are driving that. Again, I'm for free speech. You want to say what you want to say in terms of, what you believe and put it out there. But I have a right to scrutinize that as a member of Congress and also as an attorney general to figure out, what are you doing with that money? And are you driving, for example, some of the riots? Are you behind the funding when people just show up with all the same stuff at some of these Antifa riots and then act like nothing's coordinated? But with respect to guns, the people in this country, the reason that we can continue to live free in a overbearing, tyrannical state around the globe is the Second Amendment. And I firmly believe that. I've defended it in Congress. I've stood up. I've said that the reason that we have weapons is to prevent the power of the state from being able to tell us how to live. And people say, well, that's a controversial statement. It's literally littered throughout our founding document as to why the people are empowered with the ability to defend themselves. It separates us from the United Kingdom. It separates us from Australia. The first reaction in Australia was what to the terrible crime that happened 2 weeks ago, where that individual went in and shot up a bunch of folks at a it was an animus towards Jewish Australians. The first reaction by the leadership of Australia was to say, we've got to double down on gun control. Well, it's a heavily gun control country, right? And what do we see happen? Somebody had a weapon and they went and used it, because bad people are going to do that. You've got to enforce the law. You've got to prosecute bad actors. What you can't do is have George Soros DAs putting criminals on the streets who have been arrested 34 or 35 times that go out and kill or harm Texans. Like, people are sick of it. It's happening right here in Austin. And the DA, the DA in San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, and you put criminals back on the streets and you wonder why people are getting shot or why bad things are happening. It is a tiny percentage of the population that ends up harming people. Deal with that.
And let me ask you on that point. Yeah. So is that something that the Attorney General can, go in and call out the DAs, but more than call out? Because the reason I ask is the other day Governor Abbott came out and said he wants lawmakers to create a chief prosecutor in the state to prosecute crimes that local DAs won't do.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, what do you make of that? And I guess the Attorney General doesn't have the authority to do that.
So the Attorney General's office has authority that has been given to it statutorily to do prosecutors' assistance, right? So we're able to go out at the request of DAs and go help with prosecution of criminals, and we do that frequently. And I've done that, and I did that when I was in the AG's office. In fact, when I was a law clerk, one of my first jobs was clerking in the Prosecutors' Assistance Division, where you go out and help DAs. But I've been calling for, prior to, I don't mean that in any way critical, I'm saying, but even prior to what the governor said, and I agree with him about that state prosecutorial authority, I've been calling for greater authority and greater original jurisdiction in the AG's office to be able to go forward and prosecute criminals where you believe it's necessary. Now, maybe we limit it to a certain amount of state nexus, right? It's not a just entirely local crime. Maybe not, we can debate that. But for the worst offenders, I believe that for a state that has 30 million plus people, for a state that is the 8th biggest economy in the world, we are in essence our own country, right? We should act like that and govern accordingly. What would we do if we just existed as a country? Well, I believe we would have a little bit more focus on what our rangers can do, DPS, the Office of the Attorney General. I mean, we have over 100 law enforcement individuals in the AG's office. We have, a significant number of prosecutors in that Prosecutors Assistance Division. We could grow that out. We could coordinate and work with DPS and the Rangers and go root out some of the worst criminal elements that are plaguing Texas. Gangs, cartels, dangerous individuals that are put on the street that are repeat offenders. You don't have to rely on just the feds, but you can also have great partnerships with the feds. When I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office, I worked with Project Safe Neighborhoods, which was a collaborative effort with the locals and the state and the feds to get the worst offenders off the streets. So the state guys would come and say, well, I got this guy. We've dealt with him just dozens of times, and he's a felon, he's possessing a weapon. Can you take him into federal court? And I'd say, sure, let's go do it. And then we'd get somebody put away for 10 years instead of 10 months. And that effort in the 90s, right, that was born out of the crime in Richmond, Virginia. Project Exile is what it was called. And then other places it was used. Then Texas Exile adopted it. It was an early adopter in Texas. And then that became Project Neighborhoods that the feds did in collaboration with the state and locals. And we massively cleaned up the streets. Let's do that for now. Let's renew that effort. Let's empower the state of Texas with more prosecutorial authority so that the local DAs that are refusing to prosecute, we can just step in and do it. And let's have another partnership to go after human trafficking. I was originally, when I was first Assistant Attorney General, we set up the Human Trafficking Task Force. And I was appreciative of the leadership of Ken Paxton when we did that, and we worked hard to do it, hired some great people. Let's go root out human trafficking. Let's go root out the cartels and the gangs that are plaguing Texas. But let's stop putting criminals back on the street.
Last question, and that is going back to guns a little bit, but also based on what you said. Is Texas doing a good enough job of keeping guns out of the wrong people's hands?
Look, I believe generally yes, because most people in Texas are law-abiding people who have weapons, and by virtue of knowledge of that, people understand that you're going to more likely run into a law-abiding Texan with a firearm than not. But what I would say is, and it's always hard to say these kinds of things, right? Because I've got constituents who have dealt with the horrors of someone coming in and shooting someplace. Obviously, Uvalde was a terrible situation for Texas, and it's hard to say that freedom requires us to make those hard decisions, to ensure that the people of Texas are able to continue to live free and be armed so that we can push back on any tyrannical effort to take away our freedoms. In the meantime, get rid of criminals from the streets. Then figure out how you deal with the tough issues of mental health and dealing with those things. But we should recognize those mental health issues, get people the help they need, and get in front of those. We can always do a better job of those things. But I think it's critically important that the Attorney General start with the constitutional requirement to defend the people's rights to be able to defend themselves, and to focus on using the bully pulpit to say that individuals that are continuing to carry out crimes. I mean, every day I open up Twitter or X, I should say, and look at some additional story of somebody who has not just once, not twice, but dozens of times arrested, taken in, not prosecuted, no bail, released, go back out, goes into jail for a month, goes back, that recidivism, they go right back out and then they kill a cop or they kill somebody's kid. Like, that's the bulk of crime is done that way. Bulk of crime comes from repeat offenders that we're not doing what we should do with the criminal justice system. And I think the American people just want to have their streets safe again. They want to believe in elections. That's another thing that the AG's office has been given authority on that would be front and center for me. I'm the author of the SAVE Act to require that you be an American citizen to vote in American elections and prove up your citizenship when you register to vote. And we've passed it out of the House twice, and it's been blocked by Democrats in the Senate, but that would be an important issue for me as well. The AG's office has a significant amount of power in the areas that I've laid out. And where they don't have power, I think the governor's right to be talking about that state prosecutorial authority, and we'll go seek out some additional powers, all with the recognition that you want to make sure that there's a balance, that you want to make sure local DAs and you're not stepping over them unless it's necessary, but it is necessary where there's times to ensure that the worst elements of our society aren't on the streets.
Republican Congressman and candidate for Texas Attorney General Chip Roy, thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless.
We appreciate it.